Hello! I've been subscribed to Fairyloot for a year now, which means I've received 12 boxes, which has equated to actually 14 books, because there are a couple of boxes in there that had 2 books in them. I've actually technically had 13 boxes and 15 books, but I'm not including the special edition finale box in this because that's a final book in a series, and these are all either standalone books or first books in series. But now that I've read all 14, with the exception of one, which I'll come to in a minute, of the books included in my Fairyloot boxes, I thought that it would be fun to rank them from least favourite to most favourite. So that's what this video is, and I'm going to start off with the one that I actually have not read because I DNF'd it, and I don't necessarily completely rule out picking it back up again and giving it another go, but as of right now it's a DNF, and that's The Stormcrow by Kaylin Josephson. So this is of course bottom of the pile because I haven't finished it. I wasn't able to finish it. In fact, I don't think I even got that far in. I think about 3 chapters, and I just wasn't meshing with the writing style. So like I say, I might give it another go at some point, but this was actually an ARC copy. It's the only ARC copy in here, and I think it was the very first ARC of a book that I ever tried to read, so it's really sad that I didn't like it. But yeah, this one didn't work for me, so I can't really tell you what it's about because I haven't read it. Then we have Nocturna by Maya Motain, which I actually read relatively recently, and this book hugely reminds me of the Shades of Magic series by Victoria Schwab, so it's perhaps a little bit unsurprising that this isn't my favourite because I didn't particularly enjoy that series either. We follow 2 main characters here. One is a prince who is now the heir to the throne because his brother, who was heir to the throne, has gone missing and is presumed dead, but our prince does not want to admit that and doesn't want to accept that, and so he is searching for his brother. Meanwhile, we have a thief who is really just a thief, and she gets mixed up with the prince and trying to hunt down a great evil that has been accidentally let loose. And there wasn't anything wrong with the writing style of this story, there wasn't anything wrong with the characters of this story, there wasn't anything wrong with the plot of this story. It's just clearly not a concept that I enjoy because it's very similar, like I said, to the Shades of Magic series, and I didn't enjoy that either. And again, there wasn't anything wrong with the writing or the characters or anything like that. I just didn't connect with that one or with this one, so unfortunately this one's the next on this list. Then we have The Beholder by Anna Bright. In this one we follow a seneschal's daughter who has to marry in order to become seneschal herself, and when her chosen fiance very publicly and brutally rejects her, she is sent on a trip from America to Europe to find a husband, essentially. And I didn't mesh particularly well with the protagonist in this one because the beginning made out that the protagonist wanted things to change and didn't want to have to marry to be able to become seneschal, but then the entire rest of the book is just her being a little bit boy crazy. So not my favourite, sadly. And this is the first book in a series, as is Nocturna, and I don't think I'll be continuing with either of those series. Next up we have Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, which is a standalone book, and this one follows a character named Elizabeth who has grown up in a library where books can turn into monsters, and these magical books are called grimoires, and if they become monsters, those monsters are called maleficts, and she desperately wants to become a warden, which would mean that it's her job to protect people from maleficts if they rise up. But then she gets pinned for a crime that she didn't commit, and she has to get to the bottom of a mystery. And there's also some romance going on in here as well. I didn't massively connect with Elizabeth as a character. I didn't particularly buy into the relationships that were forming. The concept was really, really interesting, but there was a lot more focus on the mystery elements than the fantasy elements, which is the parts that I was most interested in. There were also quite a few plot conveniences, and overall, this just wasn't my favourite. I thought it was fine, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't love it either, which was a shame because I really, really wanted to. I mean, that's the same with all of these, really. I really wanted to love all of them, and some of them I did love, and some of them I just thought were okay. Then we have Circle of Shadows by Evelyn Skye, which is a Japanese-inspired fantasy that follows two characters who attend what sort of like a warrior school, and they're paired with each other, and that means that they have to support each other, but they're also kind of like the class clowns. They like to pull tricks on everybody and on the teachers, so they're not particularly taken seriously, which unfortunately means that when they discover something pretty bad, they're not taken seriously, and they kind of have to work together to fix the problem themselves. I feel like this book had so much promise, and I really enjoyed the Japanese inspirations that were included in this, and I don't rule out reading the next book in this series because it is going to be a series. I don't know actually if it's going to be a duology or a trilogy or a series, but I know that there are going to be more books continuing on from this one. I feel like the ending was good, but potentially also a little bit convenient, which I generally don't tend to enjoy. But I did like the characters, and I did find that the plot was interesting. I think pacing wise it was a little bit on the slow side, but otherwise I enjoyed this one enough to want to pick up the sequel when it comes out, which I think is going to be next year. Next we have To Best the Boys by Mary Webber, which is one that is marketed as one thing and which I think is not the thing that it's marketed as. So I'm going to read you the synopsis, and then I'm going to tell you my perspective of what this story is actually about. So it says, every year for the past 54 years, the residents of Pinsbury Port have received a mysterious letter inviting all eligible-aged boys to compete for an esteemed scholarship to the all-male Stemwick University. The poorer residents look to see if their names are on the list. The wealthier look to see how likely their sons are to survive. And Rentuller opens it to see if she can derive which substances the ink and parchment are created from using her father's microscope. In the province of Calden, where women train in wifely duties and men pursue collegiate education, 16-year-old Wren wants nothing more than to become a scientist. As the poor of her seaside town fall prey to a deadly disease, she and her father work desperately to find a cure, but when her mum succumbs to it as well, Wren decides to take the future into her own hands through the annual all-male scholarship competition. With her cousin Selene by her side, the girls don disguises and enter Mr. Holmes' labyrinth to best the boys and claim the scholarship's prize. Except not everyone is ready for a girl who doesn't know her place, and not everyone survives the deadly maze. Welcome to the labyrinth. Which to me makes it sound like it's a competition trope story with a labyrinth, which really drew me in because I love labyrinths in books. Love them, and I really enjoy competition tropes too, but that's not what this book is. This book is really far more focused on a girl who wants to learn, and she wants to break away from society's expectations of women, and she's incredibly clever, and she wants to be a scientist, and she's engaging in this mystery, and that's what this book is about. And I think that that's a really great message too, and I did really enjoy this one, and I think I would have enjoyed it more if I had gone into it expecting that, because the actual competition element of this book doesn't happen until like the last third, because it's not what this book is about. This book is about breaking societal norms, and I love that in books too. So yeah, I just wish that it had been marketed slightly differently. It probably would have been higher up on this list if it had, but here we are. Wicked Fox by Kat Cho is the next book I'm going to talk about, and this is a Korean inspired fantasy story, or it's based in Korean folklore really, but actually this reads much more like a contemporary with fantasy elements. So again, I think that this is one that if it had been marketed as paranormal romance, then it probably would have done better, because this is not fantasy, this is paranormal romance. And I enjoy paranormal romance too, but that's not what I went into it expecting, which meant that it was slightly disappointing for me. There is a whole lot of teenage angst in this, and it's very overly dramatic. I think it's very much based on K-drama in terms of story arc, which is fine. I've never seen any K-drama, but again, if I had known that going in, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. I was expecting much more fantasy in this one than I got, but we're essentially following a character who is a gumiho, which is a nine-tailed fox, and she survives by consuming the souls of human men. But she doesn't feel too great about that, so she goes a little bit vigilante and only takes the souls of evil men. And one day she is discovered as a nine-tailed fox by a boy named Jihoon, I think. Yes. And at the same time she loses her fox bead, which is essentially her soul, and she needs to get it back. And their sort of worlds collide, and he's in mortal peril as well, so she has to decide between her soul and his soul, and it's, like I say, all very, very dramatic, and it is enjoyable. Just go into it expecting paranormal romance, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot more than if you go into it expecting fantasy. That's just my opinion. Then we have The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen, which I actually just finished about 2 hours ago. So super recent review of this one for you. This is a very different kind of fantasy book. So we follow a character named Fi, who is part of the Crow cast, and in this fantasy world there are different casts of people based on different abilities, and the Crow cast have no ability. The highest caste are the Phoenix caste, and that's essentially royalty, and they have the ability to manipulate fire, and so on and so on. So there are various castes, and the Crows are the lowest of the low, and there is a plague running rampant in this world, and the Crows are the only caste unaffected by this plague, which means that Fi and all the other Crows are responsible for clearing up the mess of bodies that this plague leaves behind. And then there's, through a series of events that I don't want to tell you about, they enter into a bargain with a prince to help him get to a certain destination, and in exchange he will provide the Crows with protection in the future once he is crowned as a king. And there's also bone magic in this. It's actually a very, very complicated world, and I think that it could have been better explained. It's very, very short. It's only 369 pages, and I feel like the concept of this world and the magic system of this world could almost verge on epic fantasy territory, but to be able to do it justice, I think that you just need a much bigger page count than this. I believe that this is book one in a series, so I am interested in picking up the rest of the series, and hopefully we get a little bit more world building and magic system building, because I'm just a massive sucker for hugely complex worlds and magic systems, and I want all the rules and all the bounds, and I want to know exactly how it works and what the consequences are, and you just didn't get that to the full extent in this. I felt like I was scrabbling around a lot of the time to understand what was going on, and it's not because it was written in a confusing way, it was because the author never set down all of those rules and limitations and boundaries, so I never knew whether the magic would be helpful in a situation or not, and then it would be helpful and I'd be like, oh okay, so we can do that, fine. But I mean, Brandon Sanderson has spoiled me, basically. I just love magic systems with tons of rules, and this didn't necessarily have that, but I did really enjoy the storyline and the characters, so I definitely will pick up the next one in the duology trilogy series, don't know. Then we have one that I know is the first book in a duology, and that is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, and I really enjoyed this book. There were certain things that I didn't enjoy about it, and I've discussed those at length on this channel already, so I will link some videos up above where I do that. But essentially, again, same as with the Merciful Crow, there's a really interesting magic system in this one, and I just don't feel like we delved deep enough into that. There were also some things that were a little bit inconsistent with the world, such as the fact that this is set in like 16th century France, 17th century, I can never remember, and then randomly the characters slip in and out of French sometimes, which really just takes me out of the world. I'm not going to harp on about it because I've already discussed it quite a lot on my channel, but essentially this follows a witch in hiding. This is a world and a time where witches are being burned at stakes, and we have a witch in hiding and a witch hunter who, through a somewhat believable, somewhat questionable series of events, end up having to marry each other, and she knows that he's a witch hunter but he doesn't know that she's a witch, and so there's a fair bit of angst in this one too. There's also a mystery, and she has an artifact that she's being hunted for, and she's also hiding from somebody and we don't know who she's hiding from or why. So again, lots of mysterious elements in this and really interesting magic system too. This, like I said, is going to be a duology, and I think from what I've read about book 2 there is going to be a lot more focus on the magic in that one, so I am going to read it because I do find the magic system interesting, and I don't think I enjoyed the end of this book more than the beginning of this book, so it stands to reason that I will enjoy the sequel. At least that's what I think. Then we have The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh, which I actually just did a review for on my channel, so again I'm not going to talk about this one for too long, because if you want my in-depth thoughts then you can go and watch that video. But this is a book set in 1872 New Orleans, but with vampires and with mystery, and it's very film noir, and we have a very kick-ass break down barriers protagonist who I really enjoyed reading from her perspective. There's lots going on around her and she's trying to get to the bottom of it. We have some really interesting characters that we don't 100% know what's going on with them, and it's a very atmospheric story. It's not as vampire heavy as I was perhaps expecting, but I did still really enjoy this one. We are now into my top 4, and these next 3 are pretty interchangeable. I like them all a lot, but I'm going to start off with Fire and Heist by Sarah Beth Durst, and this is a standalone, I think. I'm pretty sure that this is a standalone, and it's a pretty short one, but I absolutely loved this book. It follows a character who is a wyvern, which is essentially a were-dragon, which already is very cool. And dragons, as we all know, love treasure, and they love to hoard treasure, and our protagonist wants to prove that she can pull off a really great heist. And as you would probably anticipate, things just don't go quite as planned, and she gets herself and her friends into a lot of trouble. But This was just such a fun and easy read, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself when I was reading this one. It's got emotion, it's got fast-paced action, it's got great characters, there's some humour in here, and I just absolutely loved this book. And it's almost a little bit sad that it's a standalone, but even just thinking about it now, I kind of just want to reread it, which is always a sign that a book is something I really, really love. If I want to reread it, then that means that I really, really enjoyed it, and I did really enjoy this one. Then we have A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. We have cerebral palsy representation in this one. Our protagonist is a sufferer, and she lives basically in our world, but she is, by a series of events that I don't want to tell you about, ends up in a Beauty and the Beast type world with the Beast. And I mean, we all know the story of Beauty and the Beast. That's how this goes down. There's just also cerebral palsy rep, which is great. But again, I really enjoyed this one because it was just so simply written, and the author just got straight to the point. Everybody knows the story of Beauty and the Beast anyway, and the author kind of just accepted that and was like, okay, you know what the deal is, let's not spend a bunch of time trying to set this up because everybody knows the story of Beauty and the Beast, let's just get into it. And I really appreciated that. And again, like I said, the writing style was just really, really easy to follow and made it a super, super quick read, which I also really enjoyed. And this one is the first book in a duology, I think. A Heart So Fierce and Broken is out in either January or February next year, I believe, and I will be picking it up. Then we have Viper, the first book in the Isles of Storm and Sorrow series by Bex Hogan. Again, I'm not 100% sure how many books are going to be in this series. I think it's a trilogy, but I'm not 100% sure. And I really, really loved this book too. This is sort of pirate-inspired fantasy. So we follow the daughter of the captain pirate, who is incredibly brutal, and she tries to be brutal too, but she's not really, that's just not who she really is. And then somehow they end up on opposite sides, and she's on the run and she's discovering magic and things about herself that she didn't realise. And I feel like this series has so many interesting places it could go, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing, I'm really, really interested to see what is going to happen in the next instalment. And finally, my number one favourite Fairyloot book that I've received so far, and funnily enough actually the first Fairyloot book I received, will come as no surprise to any of you who have watched any of my videos before. Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, of course, if there's a Brandon Sanderson book in a list, it will be top of the list, but in all seriousness, I absolutely loved this book. It's another one that's written in a very straightforward way, gets straight to the point of the plot, but also manages to do a whole lot of world building and character development whilst the plot keeps moving forward the whole time. In this book, we follow Spencer, who lives on an alien planet with the rest of the human race after they have developed this colony after crash landing on this planet, I believe, and the planet is also under constant attack by an alien species called the Krell, and this society is founded on courage and bravery, and therefore the epitome of society are the pilots who fight in the war against the Krell, and it's Spencer's dream to be one of them. And you would think she'd have a really great chance because her father was a well-respected pilot in this Air Force. However, in a very important battle, he turned tail and fled and was branded a coward. And in this community, it's the worst thing you can be. And Spencer is also branded a coward by association, which means that her chances of entering pilot school are very slim. But she's not willing to let her dream die. And we follow her as she deals with this situation. And I just loved this book. I love everything Brandon Sanderson writes. It's really fast paced, the characters are great, the plot is great, there's a character who is sentient that wouldn't ordinarily be sentient, and I love sentient characters who shouldn't be sentient. I don't want to say too much because I feel like I don't want to spoil it, but just trust me, there's a character in this that's just incredible and hilarious and love. And really, there's just so much to love about this book, and I'm looking right now, I can see Starsight on my TBR cart, and it's actually the next book that I'm going to pick up as soon as I finish filming. So this was a very easy pick for the very top of this list. And that's it for this much longer than I anticipated video. Have you read any of these? Are you also a Fairyloot subscriber? If you have read any of them, is your order the same or different to mine? I'd really like to know what your thoughts are about any and all of these if you've read them. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks! Bye!